Hey everybody, it's Dr. Will Cole. We're live here in our Functional Medicine Health Center in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, where we see patients around the world via webcam consultations. And we're here live with the man himself, the leader of the Diabetes Summit, Dr. Brian. Thanks for joining us today.
Absolutely. Good to see you, Will. Great to be here.
Yeah, I'm excited that you're on here. We're live here on Facebook, and we've been doing actually every Tuesday at 2 p.m. We've been doing these Tuesdays at 2, Facebook Live, where we talk about different functional medicine health topics. And this is the first time that we've actually done this split screen.
Yeah.
To talk with another functional medicine expert himself. So
very cool. Very cool.
Tell everybody about the Diabetes Summit. And it's going on right now, so people better listen up.
Yeah. And hey, I just found out my friend Razzie Berry is doing a Facebook Live with Jody Stanislaw right now also. I think they're getting started a little late, but so we have a little competition going on. We got to get more views over here on ours. They're going to be talking about the Diabetes Summit as well. Jody and Razzie were both great guests, and so it's going to be the girls against the guys, and we're going to see if we can get more views on our Facebook Live than they do over there. They're a little prettier than we are, but you know, we got the guy power going on over here, so we'll see what happens.
Competitive, so.
Anyway, so the Diabetes Summit, it's a labor of love. It's something that this is our fourth year doing it. And I know you've spoken on a couple, and you and I talked about getting you on a couple years ago because I love what you're doing. And you're not too far from where I am on the other side of the state of Pennsylvania. And, I practiced all around Philly for a long time. And, we love to beat up on the Penguins. So it's kind of an interstate rivalry there. But but I love what you're doing from a functional medicine perspective. And just wanted to have you on. So you and I talked a lot about inflammation, which is such a key issue when it comes to diabetes. And, we shared some of the foundational connections between inflammation and type 2 diabetes, and then what to do about it, which I think is huge. So really excited for people to watch your interview. I think you're going to be on day 5, I believe, which is Friday. And but between now and then, we have just a ton of amazing speakers and presentations for people to check out.
Yeah. And for those of you joining us here live, we're here with Dr. Brian. We're talking about the Diabetes Summit. We're going to talk all about inflammation and hormone imbalances today. But if you guys click the comment section below, I see that the link for the Diabetes Summit is there. So check it out for more information. There's so many great speakers. I'd say the best, the leaders in functional medicine and alternative health and wellness in general are speaking this next week. So if you could tell everybody some of the speakers that they may know.
Sure. Well, yesterday, which was day 1, we had Mark Hyman, which most people know about. And we kicked the day off with really a gem, somebody I was excited to bring to the summit. His name's Joseph Kraft. He was a 95-year-old pathologist who did just 5 decades of incredible research on the hormone insulin and how it relates to diabetes, and really completely, I think, transformed the way we should think about diabetes. He recently passed, unfortunately, but it was a real gem, and I feel blessed and honored to have really captured some of his legacy and being able to share that. So I definitely recommend people go check out. He's 95. He's a little bit hard to hear and understand. So we actually included his transcript there with that presentation too, so people can download that and read that. You can still get access to day 1 through the end of today also. So until 10 o'clock tomorrow morning. So we extended that a bit. Dr. Mark Menelacino, he's like triple board certified in holistic medicine and integrative medicine and functional medicine and all kinds of stuff, family care, and he's out in Wyoming, and he's just a fountain of information when it comes to using lifestyle to manage and correct blood sugar. And then we actually have 3 speakers who are vegan or raw food advocates, which I'm not necessarily, but I wanted to bring that aspect in. I mean, I'm all about raw food. Raw food is awesome. I think that most people do well on some animal protein as well. But I wanted to bring that aspect in. So we have Dr. Joel Kahn, who's an integrative cardiologist.
He's a good guy.
Yeah, he is. He's a great guy. And, they're not super dogmatic. So, he sort of made some allowances for, with diabetes and low carb, some people may do better, or may do okay on some animal products. And Gabriel Cousins, he's a really neat guy. He's got the Tree of Life Center out in Arizona, and he teaches raw foods, but he's not, he's a little different than some people in the vegan community. He doesn't like soy, doesn't like beans, because again, it's mostly raw food. So he actually recommends getting protein from nuts and seeds, and then high protein plant sources like chlorella and spirulina and other places like that. So it's a little different, kind of an interesting perspective. We had several people on talking about gut health. Several people talking about the link between toxins and diabetes. We had John Hayes, who's a medical physician, talk all about peripheral neuropathy and the link between diabetes and nerve issues and how to solve that naturally, which was really cool. And the list just goes on and on. I mean, just really amazing speakers. Kellyanne Petrucci, the bone broth doctor, Robin Openshaw, Green Smoothie Girl was on. And I'm probably forgetting some. Trudy Scott, who's great in anxiety and depression. And then, again, bringing it right back to you with your talk all about the link between inflammation and using a functional medicine approach to really halt and stop inflammation, or I should say probably over-inflammation, right? Because some inflammation is good. And then the link there between inflammation and blood sugar and metabolic disease, and how we can actually improve our blood sugar, metabolic health, lose weight, and so forth by getting healthy that way.
Yeah, I mean, what a great lineup. I'm so excited for this to be going on. I'm so excited to be a part of it. And thanks so much for asking me to be a part of the Diabetes Summit. But yeah, I love the conversation that we have. I think we dug really deep in the science and the technical stuff, but practical application as well when it comes to inflammation and blood sugar and hormones in general. So yeah, I mean, I think that people, when they think of inflammation, they think of, I banged my elbow and it's swollen, or I ran too much and my muscles were sore. They think of that as inflammation. But really, when we're talking about the Diabetes Summit or hormonal problems in general, a lot of these have inflammatory aspects to their pathogenesis, their core issues are pro-inflammatory problems. So it is a core issue that applies not just for diabetics, but people anywhere on this inflammation spectrum, whether they have metabolic syndrome or insulin resistance or PCOS or other hormonal problems. These are inflammatory problems that really, I hope that our conversation at the Diabetes Summit really got the message out there that yes, this is of course applicable to diabetics, but this is applicable to most of the United States are somewhere on this inflammation spectrum. Wouldn't you agree?
Yeah. I'm curious what you see in your practice, because we see obviously a lot of people with diabetes and metabolic dysfunction, and inflammation is really tied to that. But, in your practice, doing functional medicine, what percentage do you think you see of people who have some degree of that chronic systemic inflammation?
Oh, I mean, we run the lab, so I can see it from a lab standpoint, what's going on. I would say it's almost 100%. I can't think of a patient that's has some abnormal inflammatory pathway going on in their body. And we talked more about this on the Diabetes Summit. And again, I'm on day 5 for those of you that are interested. But for the conversation of it now, these are pro-inflammatory problems, what we're talking about. And we're running these inflammatory labs that we talk about at the Diabetes Summit, but things like C-reactive protein and homocysteine, we're running these pro-inflammatory labs to see where their inflammation levels are. And again, we run these labs for people around the world. And most people, the people that we're talking to at least, are having some levels of abnormal inflammation. And some inflammation, like you said, is a good thing. It's part of our immune system. It's why we are alive and can fight viruses and heal and all that good stuff. But inflammation unchecked, this hyperinflammation, this chronic low-grade inflammation that's going on can trigger these problems, these hormonal problems. We see a lot of autoimmune cases, which are end stage, really, on this autoimmune inflammation spectrum, where the immune system's actually attacking parts of their body because of some immune dysregulation or viruses, etc. But millions more somewhere on this spectrum, and it manifests in different ways for different people. But it's really getting these inflammation levels balanced, that it is a core principle to many, many different health problems.
Yeah, I agree. I think one of the big issues is with cardiovascular stress, right? So when you have this chronic inflammatory process, it sort of irritates the lining of the small blood vessels and the large blood vessels. So what we call macrovasculature and microvasculature, which is the large vessels around the heart, and then the smaller vessels in the periphery that supply blood to all of our organs and our muscles and our skin and so forth. So when you have inflammation, it eats up that very thin lining called the endothelium in these blood vessels, and that damage then leads to more issues, and more inflammation becomes this sort of vicious cycle, which ultimately can lead to thickening and can lead to atherosclerosis and heart disease, stroke, and so forth, weakening of the blood vessel and all that. So I think it's a huge issue just for that alone, not to mention all the other problems that inflammation can cause when it goes unchecked. So you made a great point on the summit of saying, well, inflammation is a natural process. When you, as you just described, bang your elbow or cut your foot or something, there's a natural inflammatory process that protects the area, right? It sort of swells up and it locks it down. It actually keeps out bacteria and protects the area. But when that happens systemically from sort of, well, actually, I'm going to ask you about this in a second, but from sort of low-grade irritation, then we have this this process that happens throughout the body, and it's like a wildfire, that sort of goes unchecked and starts causing this collateral damage, if you will. And that collateral damage can lead to a lot of disease. It's been like the Alzheimer's disease, they call it brain on fire, right? It's been like I've mentioned heart disease and stroke, diabetes. I mean, if you look at that's probably the top 4 or 5 disease killers in our country. Cancer is another one. And there's certainly maybe a little less obvious, but certainly some direct connections there too, right? So what I'd love to know from you is, because you see this every day also, what do you think are some of the most common triggers or drivers for inflammation? Where do you think the inflammation comes from? What's kind of underneath that? What's driving that inflammation in most people?
Yeah. So obviously the most common one, the most one that's most well known, but one that needs to be talked about if you haven't changed things already, is the foods that you eat. And every food that you eat is going to feed inflammation or calm it down. There's no middle ground. There's no Switzerland meal that's not doing anything for you. It's driving one or the other. And obviously to varying degrees, some will do it faster than others and slower than others. But on average, the foods you eat is going to be your best medicine or your slowest form of poison. And specifically with the foods, the most inflammatory foods that I see impact people's labs and people's health is going to be processed foods, obviously, all these boxed stuff, and specifically grains, processed grains, and gluten being a part of that, the protein in a lot of the grains. But even gluten-free grains I see spike inflammation in some people. And I think this is the point with functional medicine, or one of the points, is that every food, what works for one person may not work for the next person. So we don't want to make any blanket statements and say, well, these are going to be inflammatory for all people. Processed foods, yes, I don't need a lab to tell me you should stop eating that. But within all of these healthy food categories, what works for one person may not work for the next person. So the foods that I see do drive inflammation in some people are going to be the gluten-free grains. It's going to be dairy. Again, works for some people, not for others. And then it's the quality of the dairy, obviously. Is it grass-fed or not? Is it full fat versus the regular skim milk, fermented or not fermented? These are variables that you want to consider when you're talking about inflammation. I say polyunsaturated fats like canola oil or vegetable oil or soybean oil. These are pro-inflammatory, high omega-6 fats like these. And I would say something that you mentioned before that's non-food but can be in our food is toxins. And that's the argument, I think, for some people when it comes to grain and gluten. Well, is it the gluten protein, or is it the sprays and the pesticides that they're spraying on these crops, or is it just the overindulgence of them? And I think there is a conversation to be had with that, because I think that sometimes we lump in these words, these buzzwords like gluten over the past few years, and I'm guilty of it as well, writing about these things and perpetuating this. But but I do feel like we need to look on it an individual basis. And these are foods that I see a lot impact people. And then what you would consider healthy foods, I consider healthy foods, but can be inflammatory for some people, are going to be legumes, which are high in lectins, which can be pro-inflammatory. Nightshades, high in alkaloids, they can be inflammatory for some people. So these are the foods that myself in functional medicine really want to customize the foods based on the individual. But these are foods that I see driving inflammation in well-intentioned people trying to do the right thing, but it's not right for their body, and their labs are showing that, and their health symptoms are showing that. And then toxins, environmental toxins can be inflammatory. Stress levels can be inflammatory. You can be eating, kale salads and kombucha and all this good stuff all day long, but if you're driving inflammatory cascades in your body because you're stressed out, you're going to be counteracting your healing process and balancing out your inflammation levels. So looking at stress, looking at sleep, which drives stress cascades in the body too. So these are the common things that I see driving inflammation. And then kind of tied into toxins and viruses and foods and all of that is the gut, which I know that several of your speakers will be talking about, because it is so paramount when it comes to diabetes and when it comes to just overall health, is looking at the gut and its implication to driving systemic inflammation. So we measure pro-inflammatory proteins in the gut, like calprotectin and lactoferrin, to really see, is there underlying gut inflammation that's driving systemic inflammation? And you don't have to have gut symptoms to have gut problems. And then we find that a lot, where you'll have elevated inflammation in the gut, but they're not having any digestive symptoms that they notice. They're going to the bathroom fine, but it's these underlying gut problems that are fueling inflammation systemically.
Right, for sure. Yeah, I see that often, and I like the way you put that. You don't have to have gut symptoms to have gut problems, and that it's totally true. Hey, what do you see with oxalates? I've had some people ask questions on day one about oxalates. We had Robin Openshaw, Green Smoothie Girl, talk a lot about vegetables, and we sort of have this thing that you can't go wrong with veggies, but there are certain problems with vegetables, like you mentioned, nightshade vegetables with certain properties that can trigger autoimmune disease. And some vegetables are high in oxalates. And so we had a few comments about that. And I've worked with people who are sensitive to oxalates over the years too. Is that something you see a lot? Are you seeing more of it? And what are some of the things to watch out for with oxalate sensitivity, and how do you deal with it?
Yeah, I do see it occasionally. I would say it's extremely high. I put it on par with histamine intolerance, where yes, it's there. Yes, it's a problem, but it's not something that I see as ubiquitous as some of the other things that I mentioned. But what I do see a lot of times with people that have oxalate intolerance issue, it's really an underlying gut problem. Is when you really radically heal the gut, you can typically bring a lot of these foods back in. Even the high histamine foods, the high oxalate foods, you can start to bring back in, and cooking can help that as well. And what do you see clinically?
Yeah, kind of the same thing. I think it's a smaller percentage. It does seem to, I don't know if it's becoming more prevalent or people are just becoming more aware of it and they're starting to make that connection. But, it's one of those things where if you make that connection with, you can just go on Google and type in like high oxalate foods and pull a list. And if you notice, so one of the things that we'll do with cases that are a little bit more difficult. So, we've made some great dietary changes. We have them exercising and moving. They're kind of handling their stress pretty well. They're sleeping okay. They're taking some supplements. They're doing all the major things, but something seems to be driving their blood sugar up. That's or an inflammatory process, and oftentimes they go together. Then we start, putting the medical detective hat on and say, okay, what are we missing here? There's a trigger that's driving this. And so that's when we dig into things like food sensitivities and oxalate intolerance or histamine intolerance and some of these other issues. And oftentimes we'll find that even like MTHFR problems, these can be drivers for blood sugar, for inflammation, because essentially it causes a stress response in the body. And it's a physiological stress response. So you don't maybe feel it, you don't feel stressed, but it's happening on the inside. And it triggers the same reaction as if you were under a lot of stress. It still causes a cortisol release. It affects adrenaline levels, and that all raises blood sugar. And in other ways, not through the cortisol channel, but in other ways, it triggers that inflammatory process, probably gut mediated, like you said, Will. So oftentimes that's when we'll dig into those issues, and we'll do food sensitivity testing. If people either don't want to spend the money on that, or it doesn't show much, then we'll start, just doing a lot of good food journaling, trying to figure out, okay, let's make some connections here. When I eat this food, I just don't feel good, or I feel inflamed, or or it soars my blood sugar, when it wouldn't make sense to do that. Like somebody eats a big bowl of broccoli with, olive oil, and it raises their blood sugar. That doesn't really make a lot of sense. So there's got to be something in there that's triggering a stress response. And so that's where I usually uncover these oxalate issues or histamine, like you said, food sensitivities. And sometimes it is worth testing and really diving deep and looking at the gut, doing some of those tests that you mentioned, looking for food sensitivities, looking for hormone imbalance, looking at neurotransmitters, looking at organic acids, whatever we need to do to find that root cause. And I think that's where functional medicine can kind of take this to the next level.
Yeah, I definitely, I'm a firm advocate, and I see it on an hourly basis. So, the people, our family and friends, but also my patients, are going through this from doctor to doctor, and really nothing changes but this pile of labs, and they come to me and they're like, they had nothing to show for it other than this pile of labs. And to really get to these core issues, the things that we're talking about today, the things that you're covering at the Diabetes Summit, and we're having at the conversation in our conversation on day 5, I know it's life-saving information, really getting this information out there. Something that I wanted to talk to you a little bit about, since I did title this on my Facebook as inflammation, which we covered, and hormonal imbalances, which we kind of talked a little bit. But specifically with leptin resistance, it's something that I've written about before on my website, and I've written about on Mind Body Green. I'm actually digging a little bit deeper in it on this bigger sort of leptin resistance guide that's going to be out in a couple of weeks. But it's tied inextricably to insulin resistance. So I don't know if you want to tell everybody about leptin resistance, if you want to speak on that.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think it's really tied into insulin resistance. Leptin's a hormone that makes us feel full, basically, and it's released by the fat cell. So when we eat, body releases it, makes us feel full. We stop eating. But just like people can become insulin resistant from an over-release of insulin, many people can become leptin resistant from an over-release of leptin, and the cells start to become desensitized to it. Just like if you're in a loud room and you sort of tune out some of the noise, or you're in a, maybe you're in an area that has a bad smell. Eventually you're there for a while, you don't smell it anymore. And so our bodies tune these things out, and we do the same thing on a cellular level with these hormones. So we over-release insulin when we when we eat foods that trigger too much insulin, which is mainly sugar, processed foods, processed carbohydrates. It can happen from an over consumption of certain proteins too, but that's a little less common. So we over-release insulin, leptin by the same way. When we overeat, we over-release leptin. When we have too much accumulated body fat, we over-release leptin. Some people just overproduce leptin, and then there's hormone connections there too. So when we release a lot of insulin, oftentimes we release a lot of leptin, and they kind of go hand in hand there. So they when they discovered leptin years ago, it was interesting. They thought they discovered this cure for obesity, right? Because they said, well, this is the hormone that makes people stop eating, and it must be that people who are obese or just never get full don't have enough leptin. And they found this in rats. So the rats that they found that didn't make enough leptin, they gave them leptin, and they stopped eating and they lost weight. When they tried to apply that to humans, though, they found out that it actually isn't typically a lack of leptin. It's leptin resistance. So people who are obese and overweight usually are making plenty of leptin. They're usually making too much leptin, just like insulin, but they've become desensitized to it. So it's kind of you're right, it goes on a similar path. There's another hormone called adiponectin or adiponectin, which is also made by fat cells and is anti-inflammatory and helps to resensitize us to insulin and leptin to a certain degree. And so you'll see, I don't do this as much anymore, but I used to test all of my patients for leptin and adiponectin and insulin, and you would see that the adiponectin levels start to drop as they become more leptin and insulin resistant. And then as they become more leptin and insulin sensitive, those adiponectin levels rise again, it's an anti-inflammatory hormone too. So it keeps that inflammation at bay. So those three kind of work together in an interesting way and metabolically. And you can test them, which is interesting to look at. What I found is I just started finding that everybody I tested had high leptin, high insulin, and low adiponectin. So I was like, why am I testing this? And they're expensive too. So I was like, why am I testing this on everybody? Because they all have the same pattern. But so we mainly test insulin and sometimes leptin now too. But it's fascinating. Now, the way to, and you can talk about this too, Will, because you just wrote a guide about it. I'd love to get your perspective. But the way to lower leptin is similar to lowering insulin. It's get the levels down so that your body can become resensitized to those hormones, just like you would become resensitized to sound by getting out of that loud area, going somewhere quiet for a little while, and your ears can sort of, reset. You want to reset the cells, and some of that is making new cells. Some of that is making new receptors. Some of it is helping those receptors become more sensitive. And we do that by, again, lowering those hormone levels. The best way to do that is by, doing the things, not doing the things that require them. So with insulin, it's cutting out the sugar, processed foods, carbohydrates. With leptin, it's I find eating less. So, and then spreading your meals out. So you have these long stretches of time between feedings. Things like intermittent fasting, for example, are really good at improving leptin sensitivity. Fasting in general, if you can start to stretch that time even more, is great at helping to make the body more sensitive to leptin and insulin. And then there's other things you can do with supplements and so forth that are helpful too. But what did I miss? And I don't know, what do you usually do to help people become more leptin sensitive?
I think you covered everything. And you're right. It is a surrogate lab for insulin resistance, and they kind of go hand in hand. And, if you are insulin resistant, you're almost certainly leptin resistant, and vice versa. For some people, I think they want to know, or maybe they're not even thinking I'm insulin resistant, but they are struggling with weight gain. So measuring things like leptin can really kind of show them, hey, this is actually beyond just you not dieting enough or counting calories enough. And you have these underlying hormonal resistance patterns that you really have to aggressively heal over time. And a lot of people, especially women, but men too, are really shamed by weight gain and trouble losing weight, that they've kind of punished their body with all these fad diets over the years, to really kind of show them in a lab, look, this is not just because you have low willpower, or this is because you're just not great at dieting. This is, you have to heal these underlying hormonal problems, and you can't heal a body you hate. And ultimately getting to this point of saying, look, this is measurable. You're not just crazy or lazy. You're actually going through these real problems. And so measuring leptin, I think, is appropriate for some people. We want it to be about 4 to 6, the functional optimal range. And on what you said, everything that you said is what I would say. On top of that too is not eating too late. I've read some pretty amazing research of how people that eat late, which is kind of common advice when people want to lose weight, but what it actually does is it spikes up leptin, messes their circadian rhythm up, and on top of that, people that aren't getting good sleep at night, it will spike leptin as well. And this applies to people that just are watching, Jimmy Fallon too late and staying up too late, but also people that work night shifts and people that have crazy schedules. They're at increased risk for leptin resistance and metabolic syndrome and type 2 diabetes. Obviously, most people can't quit their job.
Right.
You have to be extra diligent with the things you can control if you can't change your shift, because these things can mess up your hormones, and that's not good when you want to live a long, healthy life.
I'll tell you one way you can tell that you're probably leptin resistant without even having a test, which this is true for me personally, so I can relate to this, is a lot of people describe, and again, I find this to be the case, that if I don't eat for a long period of time, I'm fine. Like, I'm not hungry because I've tuned my body to be pretty good at fat burning. So I can miss meals, I can go long stretches of time fasting. But once I eat, then all of a sudden I want to eat more and I get really hungry. And this is what happens with leptin resistance. Is what's supposed to happen is when you eat, your brain release, or your fat cells release leptin. It goes and talks to your brain and shuts off the hunger sequence, basically. But when people are leptin resistant, they eat, and because they're leptin resistant, that doesn't work. And now they've released a surge of insulin and created this cascade where they want to eat more because it starts to pull their blood sugar down, not usually down into hypoglycemic range, but relatively down to where it's their brain says, ooh, I want more food now. So they don't have the leptin signals working to turn off hunger, and they've got this insulin blood sugar dynamic that makes them want to eat more. So sometimes it's like, breaking the dam, and you start eating, and now all of a sudden you want to eat more, and there's sort of no end point. That's to me, that's the key with leptin resistance, is you can just keep eating and eating and eating until you somehow use willpower or force you either become so full to where you have other hormones like GLP-1 in the gut and so forth that shuts off the hunger, or you just say, I can't eat anymore, I have to stop eating, and that's leptin resistance, right? Because leptin's supposed to tell, signal your brain to tell your body to stop eating. Okay, that's enough. We've had food, but it doesn't work when you're leptin resistant.
Yeah, absolutely. So really getting that leptin signaling sensitive again, to increase leptin sensitivity is the clinical objective there, and something that over time, these are reversible, improvable, manageable hormonal resistance things, and things that you and I see achieved all the time. So I think this is a great conversation, and for those of you that haven't seen the diabetes summit yet, it's going on, it's not too late. And for those of you watching this on replay, even after the diabetes summit is over, you can get the videos and watch them anytime that you want. So tell about that for people that are watching this in the future.
Yeah. So again, today is day 2, and we have Dr. Tom O'Brien, who he's awesome, talking all about gut health and autoimmune disease. Sayer G, who's always enlightening. Dr. Michael Bruce today, who's the sleep doctor. He's going to talk all about the importance of sleep with blood sugar health. And then Razzie Berry, who runs basically a naturopathic website and is just an expert in all things natural medicine and just shares a ton about toxins and where all these toxins are coming from and how to avoid them and how to detoxify the body and so forth. So really cool information today. You can still get all of yesterday's talks right now if you register, but those will expire at 10 a.m. tomorrow. So you want to make sure you jump on that now so you can watch yesterday's talks. And then we have day 3 tomorrow, day 4 Thursday, day 5 on Friday, which is Dr. Will, when your talk is all about inflammation. It's going to be awesome. So you can watch all this free all week. If you miss a session or two, or you just want to add this to your health library, which a lot of people do. A lot of people say, I want to be able to go back and listen to this later, or I don't really have time to do it all right now, but I want to have access to it. You can pick up there's a package where it's very inexpensive, and you can get all the videos, all the audio files, so you can listen to them on your like on your smartphone or iPod or whatever. Anybody has iPods anymore? You can, I do too. Good for exercise. You can, there's transcripts of all the talks, which is great. There's all the PowerPoint slides plus a bunch of bonuses, and you contributed just a phenomenal bonus package. So you can get all of that, by just picking that up and maybe save yourself the time of going through it all. But again, if you don't want to do that or can't do that, it's free all week. So go check it out. Yeah,
I'm so excited. And for those of you here on the Facebook page now, we're going to be talking about some awesome next level information to really get inflammation down. We get super science nerdy. We talk about PPARs, guys. Talk about activating your NFR2 pathways.
Nice.
We're getting real on day 5. But check out all the other speakers too. A lot of them are friends and colleagues of ours, and good stuff. All right. I think this is good.
Perfect, man.
Thanks for joining me on Facebook.
Absolutely. This is fun.
Yeah, thanks so much. And for those of you that want to watch this in replay, you can rewatch this, and we'll see you next Tuesday at 2 p.m. where we talk about another functional medicine health topic. See you then.
Dr. Will, take care.
Thanks, you too, Brian.